Hello, my friend, and thank you so much for joining me in today's video. If you are one of my long-term viewers or if you've seen a few of my videos in the past, thank you so much for coming back. I appreciate you for sticking around through so many shifts and changes in my channel. And if you are new here, welcome. I am so grateful that you've joined me on this journey. My name is Sarah. I've lived an interesting life. I've done everything from move to Vancouver to go to art school when I was 20. I worked as a tarot card reader after being discovered by a local psychic who had seen me in her dreams. That's a story for a future video. I've gone to India to pursue a spiritual path. I took the kavi, which is like the saffron robe, along with the vows of renunciation to become a Hindu nun. And then I realized the group I was with was a cult, and I left and spoke out publicly about some of the abuse that went on in that space. And yeah, I've just done a lot of different things. But of all the things I've done, my favorites always involve spirituality and creativity. Spirituality, not necessarily in a ritualistic, dogmatic, formulaic way that follows a tradition prescribed by somebody else, but more like the spirituality that happens in dream symbology in the inner space, in meditative visions, in stargazing revelations. You know those moments when you are totally tuned in and suddenly your perception shifts ever so slightly and you have an aha moment about yourself or your life. I love those moments. And I also love getting into the flow state, whether that means sitting at the piano and spontaneously playing music or sitting at a piece of paper or a canvas and spontaneously drawing or painting. And my plan for this channel is to do more videos like this one where I do either a painting or a drawing and record a voiceover to talk about whatever interests me. And hopefully it interests you too. So yeah, with all that said, I want to get into today's theme, which is spiritual messengers. Have you ever had this happen to you where you've been thinking really seriously about something and maybe you're driving in your car or you're sitting on the bus or you're walking down the street, but you're out there in motion and suddenly you hear a song playing. Maybe it's in the car next to you at a red light, or somebody gets on the bus and they're very rudely, they don't have earbuds, they're just playing out their phone speaker. Or somebody passes you on the sidewalk and they've got a speaker going. And the particular song that you hear exactly encapsulates the thing that you've been thinking about. Or it's a song that you heard with a person that you've been thinking about. Or, somebody pops into your head and then a second later the phone rings and they're calling you. I think we've all had moments like this. Even the most skeptical, atheistic, least spiritually open-minded people I know have had moments like that give them pause to reconsider that maybe there is something more to consciousness than that which anatomical science has revealed. By anatomical science, I mean like the neurosciences. They'll say that we have these thoughts because of those neurons firing and these synapses with the blah, 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 right? Like you've learned this, you understand reality. So if you think about this and then that happens, it's a coincidence. That's how science tends to explain these things away. And yet when you're on a spiritual journey and you've surrendered to the higher good and your goal in life is to make this world a better place and to learn what you need to learn while you're here and to be helpful to others, you start to find an increased frequency in your synchronicities. Frequency meaning recurrence. So like they happen more often. Not like high frequency, low frequency, but like, yeah, how frequently something happens. They happen more. And the more synchronicities happen, the harder it is to ignore them. If you have a song pop into your head and you step out your door and you hear that song playing and it happens once, okay, maybe it's a coincidence. But if every time a song gets stuck in your head, it comes on in the grocery store or on the radio, or your neighbor starts blasting it, you start to realize perhaps you are in a conscious flow and you've tuned into the music around you. Did the song pop into your head and then somebody else played it to confirm what's in your head? Or was somebody else about to play it? And since you are nearby and psychically in tune, it popped into your head like a premonition. This is where I feel like things get interesting when we think about timelines and the eternal now. There's a really cool concept out there that the linear past to future timeline that we're experiencing, where we remember the past, the future is a mystery, the present is what we experience. There's a concept that this exists only in our three-dimensional space. But beyond this dimension, time is all happening simultaneously. In the eternal now, the past and the future are both equally existent. There's no reason you can't remember the future or plan the past when you get into that eternal now state. And this is the state in which I feel like we have deja vu and premonitions and past life flashbacks and maybe even future life visions. It's a beautiful space to be in. And it is the space that I feel spiritual messengers are able to penetrate us. That came out so much more sexual than I meant it to. And this is like the 5th time I've had to restart this voiceover because I keep getting interrupted. So I'm just going to leave it there and trust that you know what I mean. If your thought process is too rigid and your view of reality is too formulaic, too dogmatic, if you believe what everybody else has told you to believe, at the exclusion of any new information or new experience, you're not necessarily going to have strangers walking up to you on the street telling you incredible things about your past lives because there would be no point for it. And you know how you're only going to get a really great conversation with a person if there's some form of connection that you establish with them, if there's a rapport. If you're sitting with somebody and that person has like a gold mine of observational points about something that interests you, and yet the topic of interest never comes up in conversation, you're both a little bit rigid, neither one of you is opening up very much, you're not going to tap that gold mine, tap that well, or get into that gold mine. However, if you're sitting with somebody and they know all kinds of stuff about something that fascinates you, and you're open, you're chatty, you let them know what your interests are, and they find out that they share that interest in common, they will feel so much more inspired to tell you about it because it's not going to be a wasted effort on their part. You know, if you've got a special interest, you're not going to start geeking out on that special interest with somebody who cares nothing for it. Well, I feel like spirit guides, guardian angels, extraterrestrials, those in the love light vibration, whatever word you want to put to them, the universe, God, whatever, has no interest in speaking to somebody who will ignore, disregard, or possibly not even believe the message. These messages, I feel, come to those of us who are ready for them. And so that old spiritual adage, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear, feels literally true in the sense that you are never going to learn something if you refuse to listen to those who are here to talk about it. You're never going to connect with somebody if you shut down and avoid eye contact with them. But if you make yourself available, make yourself open, get into a receptive state, you can probably connect with just about anybody. So yeah, I feel like spiritual messengers will come to us when we pose our questions to existence and put it out there that we are ready to listen. So there's a friend of mine. She went to something like a hot yoga class once. It was her very first time ever taking that class. And she does not, interestingly enough, she doesn't consider herself to be a medium or a channel. She thinks of herself as a very logical person. She's university educated, she's professional. And yet, as she was in that yoga class, she had a recurring thought pop into her head. Every time she looked at the instructor, she thought she had to go up to her after the class and tell her that her cat is still with her and still loves her and appreciates everything she did for him. And she was like, this is so strange. What if that lady never even had a cat? But it was such a pressing thought that she decided to just do it. It wasn't a regular class she signed up for. It was a visiting instructor. She figured if she makes an ass of herself, she'll never see this person again. So it's not like she's got anything to lose. So when the class ended, she hesitantly went up to the front and said to the lady, great class. I enjoyed it. Thank you. This might sound crazy, but I had this thought pop into my head. Your cat still loves you and is with you and appreciates everything you did for him. The lady starts to cry. And she tells my friend that her cat died a week earlier, and she almost didn't even teach that class because of her grief, and that it was just so meaningful to her to get that message from a student because it shows what she's felt, that her cat is still with her and still loves her. She felt like it might be wishful thinking, but when somebody in her class, a total stranger, picked up on it, it gave her permission to keep talking to her cat and to keep forging that connection. But it gets even cooler. My friend then gets this vision of this yoga instructor feeding a squirrel, and then sees in her inner space that squirrel form kind of morph into a cat form. And along with that, she heard a message that this cat chose to be that lady's cat when that lady was kind to this animal in the previous embodiment as a squirrel. And my friend's like, you know what? Fuck it. I'm just going to tell her what I'm hearing. So she says, you know what? I heard that your cat chose you to be his person because when he was a squirrel, you were the only human who was nice to him. And at this point, the yoga instructor's eyes got super big. And she was like, oh my God. Like when I was a college student, there was a family of squirrels living in the tree outside of my window. And every day I would feed them. And there was this one particular squirrel who I got really close to. And I would pet him and he would take food right out of my fingertips and rub his little cheek against my finger. And I was so sad when that squirrel died. And about a year later, I got my kitty. And she said she always felt like her cat had certain little mannerisms that mimicked the body language of that squirrel. And my friend, doesn't even think of herself as being like a medium friend, just passed all these beautiful revelations on to a total stranger because she decided to trust her inner message. And you know what? There was a day I had something like this happen to me as well, where I was the messenger. And it happened on my way to work. I was working at a store called Dragon Space on Granville Island in Vancouver. Shout out to Dragon Space. Like if you're ever in Vancouver and you like gemstone jewelry and sterling silver or like dragon and fairy figurines and just mystical ambiance, tarot cards, like Wiccan stuff, go check out Dragon Space. It is such a cool store. So yeah, I'm on my way to work, and there's a figure in Vedic spirituality called Babaji. Babaji, Mahavatar Babaji. And I knew who he was after reading about him in Autobiography of a Yogi, and also having some personal visionary meditative experiences of him. Maybe my Babaji stuff is for a whole other video too. But I'm very well aware of Babaji. I've spoken with him in my inner space and prayed to him. Pray might be the wrong word for it, because I don't like the idea of one person being lower and another being higher and being like a mendicant begging to some spiritual authority to do something for us. I feel more comfortable with the concept of communion, communing, being in oneness with whatever, however you want to call it. But anyway, I'm on my way to work at Dragon Space. I'm at a red light. I'm waiting to go. And suddenly, a thought pops into my head different from my regular thought stream. And the words to the thought are, today, you will pass a message on to one of my disciples. And I stop and I'm like, wait, what? I don't have disciples. What is this thought? And then in the inner space, I hear it again. Only this time there's the introduction first. This is Babaji. Today you will meet one of my disciples and you will give her a message from me. And then I started to really listen more carefully. And I questioned the voice and said, what is the message? And he said, the message is, I've heard your prayer and I accept you completely. And that was it. I'm like, that's it. You want me to tell somebody, I've heard your prayer and I accept you completely, and this is from Babaji? And he said, yes. And I said, well, how will I recognize the disciple for whom you're giving this message? And I heard, while you're at work, you'll see a beautiful girl walk in who looks North Indian, tall with long hair. The moment you see her, you'll think of me and you'll know that's the one who gets this message. So I thought, okay, if it happens, if a beautiful, tall North Indian girl with flowing black hair walks into Dragon Space, I will absolutely say to her, Mahavatar Babaji told me to tell you he heard your prayer and he accepts you completely. Because I was really sure it was not going to happen. So I was like, okay, sure, I will do this. About halfway through my shift, the bell rings that signifies somebody coming into the store. And I look over and there's a group of 3 girls. The third girl to walk in is a beautiful, tall North Indian girl with long flowing hair. And she looks like her facial features look like the famous illustrations of Babaji, only in a female form. And as I was looking at her, her face morphed and her hair shifted and she became, just your average brown-haired white girl. She didn't look North Indian. She didn't have flowing black hair. Her features no longer looked like Babaji's. But I heard the voice in my head say, you saw her as she appeared in her previous life. That is the one. And I knew what I had to do. I walked up to her and, greeted her friends, welcome to the shop. Let me know if you need a hand with anything. And then to the third girl, I said, and for you, this might sound strange, but I have a message for you from Babaji. And the first 2 girls stopped and turned around and stared at her and started to giggle. And she was like, okay. And I said, he told me to tell you that he heard your prayer and he accepts you completely. And she started to cry. And she looked at one of her friends and said, "Can you tell her?" And that friend told me that she had just confided in those two friends of hers that she had learned about Hinduism and come across some information about Babaji and felt like she had been with him in a previous lifetime, and that she wants to be guaranteed that he accepts her completely so that when this lifetime comes to an end, she doesn't have to live in the Western world again. She wants to know for sure that she can go back, be his disciple in the Himalayas, be in a higher realm, and know that she still has a place with him. So being told that he heard her prayer and he accepts her completely gave her that reassurance that yes, like her place with him is not lost. She has it. There's no way I could have known any of that except that I listened to and trusted my inner voice. Just like my friend with her hot yoga instructor. She didn't know that she had even had a cat, let alone that she had lost her kitty a week before. And the very specific detail about the squirrel confirmed that it wasn't just, a stab in the dark guess. This was something she genuinely tapped into. So yeah, we can be messengers for others. And, people like Teresa Caputo, is that her name? I might have mispronounced her last name, but, Teresa, the big-haired lady, the Long Island medium. I think she's a great living example in our age of somebody who gets messages for strangers, and instead of censoring herself or second guessing herself or being reluctant to be proven wrong, she just puts herself out there again and again whenever she hears these inner voices. I love that about her. I love that about people like Daryl Anka, who channeled Bashar, about Esther Hicks, who channels Abraham. I think channelers are the coolest people. Mediums are the coolest people, because the greatest suffering we experience in life, in my opinion, the greatest suffering is grief. And that can come in so many different shapes and forms. Grief for the loss of a loved one, whether that be a pet, any animal, any person with whom we're bonded, even celebrities whose music or art really influenced us. We feel that loss when they're gone. And along with that feeling of loss, depending on the level of the connection you have with the one who's crossed over, it can almost feel like life itself has come to an end because you will never again have what you had with them. That is the worst suffering. And I think the next worst suffering is like the fear of oblivion. The fear that after we die, there's nothing more. We just get erased from the chalkboard of life, and that's it. And so when people come along who tap into these spiritual message realms and convey words of love and encouragement from someone who's passed away and give us just enough to reassure us forevermore that there is life after death, whether that's because your kitty has come back and spoken to you through a student in a yoga class to tell you, hey, I picked you as my person back when I was a squirrel and you fed me. And I was like, I like that human. I'm going to take a lifetime just to be loved by her. Or whether it's somebody coming up to you and saying, hey, you prayed to Babaji. He told me to tell you he heard your prayer and he accepts you completely. That can be enough that for the rest of your life, you know that when you're praying, you are being listened to. It's not a one-way conversation. And if you can't hear the reply, just stay open enough that the universe will find somebody who does hear the reply and they will pass it on to you. These cosmic messengers have been my favorite encounters in life. Moments when I've been able to be that messenger remind me to trust my inner voice. And moments when I've met people who are that messenger for me it's been a reminder that I'm not totally alone and abandoned down here on this planet where cruelty exists, and the choice to be good or bad is available for everyone. And some choose bad if they think that by being bad, they will get more. And mistakenly, they think that will make them feel good. It can be tough down here when your intentions are always for compassion and the betterment of everyone, to create beauty and to radiate love. When you come down here and find out that's kind of the opposite of how the powers that wanna be want you to relate to existence. So when the spiritual messenger comes in with the spiritual message, it can be so transformative because it reminds us to trust the higher, not to get caught up and stuck in the lower. So the very first time I ever met a spiritual messenger, I was working at a store, again in Vancouver. Most of my most intense spiritual experiences happened in Vancouver. Maybe that'll be another video. But yeah, I was working at a store called a Turnabout in Kitsilano on West Broadway. And it was towards the end of the day, so there weren't any customers in. There was just me and this really cool older lady named Lou. She was cashing out one of the tills. I was putting away some clothes. And a man walked into the store. I looked over as he was walking towards me, and I didn't recognize him. He wasn't a regular customer. He didn't look like any of the clients who consigned clothing. And he definitely didn't look like he needed to be shopping at a secondhand clothes store. He was very well dressed, like tailored suit, designer shoes, good haircut. He looked kind of like a Michael Douglas or like Richard Gere type, like older Hollywood man would be the way I would sum him up. So he walked right up to me and I asked him if I could give him a hand with anything. And he said, "I'm not here for the clothing, I'm here for you." And I immediately took a step back because it seemed kind of like a pickup line. And I said, "Well, you can't have me. Like, I'm not for sale. You can have the clothes, but you can't have me." And he laughed and he said, "I'm glad that you are wary of strangers. That'll help keep you safe in life, but don't worry about me. I'm not trying to pick you up. I'm here to give you a spiritual message." And I was awestruck because back then I secretly read tarot cards. I hadn't opened up and told anybody about it yet. I meditated with crystals, but the only people who really knew about that were like my mom and my then boyfriend and the people at the crystal shop who always saw me coming because they knew I would buy whatever moldavite or celestial quartz or sugilite they told me I needed. So yeah, it was unexpected. And he did not look like a mystic. This was not somebody in flowing robes with a long beard or a turban or a bunch of big heavy rings or prayer beads. Like he looked like he was ready to go to a red carpet. And I listened. And he said to me, "Sarah was more spiritual than Abraham." And it was such a weird message to receive because I had basically ruled out the Bible as a source of spiritual truth around grade 2 when I had my first communion. I was raised Catholic. And as soon as I found out that we had to say the words, "Lord, I am not worthy to receive you," before taking communion, I raised my little hand and said to the priest, "Why am I not worthy to receive the Lord?" And the priest said, "Because you are a sinner." And I said, "No, I'm not." And he said, "Yes, you are." And so like a good little undiagnosed autistic girl, because I'm sure that's what I am, I listed off the sins. I said, well, I always honor my mother. I've never stolen. I've never lied. I've never had sex. I've never murdered anyone. I've never coveted my neighbor's wife. I didn't even know what it meant, but I memorized the damn words. And I was like, how can you say that I'm a sinner when I've never sinned? And that was when he revealed to us the concept of original sin. Well, historically, in the Garden of Eden, bullshit, bullshit, bullshit. And I just hated that. I was like, there is no way. I tried to argue theology with someone who clearly wouldn't take me as an intellectual equal because I was a little girl in grade 2. But none of his answers satisfied me. I said, if God is perfect, why would God create imperfect humans? And if God loves us, why does he punish us for a sin committed by somebody thousands of years ago, millions of years ago, historically? Like, why are we called sinners just because she and he sinned? Anyway, I don't ascribe to biblical stuff, but it quite amazed me that the message had to do with someone biblically who shared my name. So yeah, when he said Sarah was more spiritual than Abraham, I said like, wow, my name is Sarah. And he said, I know who you are, and that's why I'm here. And what you need to understand is that Jupiter is entering Sagittarius for the strongest cycle since the moment of your birth. It's time for you to get on your spiritual path. And I was like, now my mind was starting to get blown because Sagittarius is my sun sign. And I was like, wow, I am a Sagittarian. And this man said, anybody off the street would have a 1 in 12 chance of guessing your sun sign because there are only 12 of them. But Jupiter entering Sagittarius at the moment of your birth is far more celestially rare. And when you find out that this is true, you'll know to trust what I have to tell you. And so I asked him, how can I find out it's true? And he said, like, when you get home tonight, go online, get a free birth chart, and you will see Jupiter in Sagittarius when you were born. And so I did. And keep in mind, this happened back in 2006 or 2007. I didn't have Facebook yet. Instagram hadn't been invented. I didn't have a YouTube channel. The closest thing to social media I had was a MySpace page. And my birthday was not listed on it. Neither was my place of work. I hadn't really updated it since before moving to Vancouver. So it's not like it is today. It's not like this man could have encountered my profile on Google or Facebook. It's not like he could have looked me up and found this information. It was very, very interesting how he knew what he knew because sure enough, Jupiter was in Sagittarius the moment I was born. And what that kind of taught me was that there is something to astrology and there is something to alignments, like celestial astrological alignments. Jupiter is the ruling planet of Sagittarius. And when the ruling planet of your zodiac sign is in your zodiac sign, it is an auspicious time for you. So like whatever your sign is, when the ruling planet of your sign is in your sign, things will be accelerated. Like the traits and the qualities of your sign will be enhanced. And so I read all about it, that those with Jupiter in Sagittarius who are Sagittarians will be extra philosophically bent, not really get along with the rules of the world, will feel like their life is a quest for higher knowledge. It really matched who I was. And it did change my reality. I never saw that man again. Actually, as he left the store, I walked over to the counter to ask Lou, like, was that secretly your husband? Are you pranking me? Because she knew my birthday. And Her face was white. She just shook her head with the biggest eyes and said, "No, I've never seen him before. Like, I thought you were pranking me." She thought maybe I had known this man and told him, like, come in and say these things in front of my coworker. It'll blow her mind. So when we both confirmed that neither one of us had set that up, we were both quite astonished. And then he walked back into the store, rattled off a bunch of numbers. He was like 604, blah, 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 blah. The only part I remember is like the 604 Vancouver area code. And I just kept looking at him and he's like, if you remember those numbers, call me and we'll start your Kabbalah lessons. And I was like, I already forgot. Like, I didn't even try to memorize those numbers. Like, what would you do if somebody you're not expecting to hear a phone number from and you don't have a pen and paper in hand or anything to like type it into? If you're just standing there and somebody tells you my number is, and then they rattle off 10 digits, you're not going to remember. Unless you've got like a supercomputer brain. Like, tell me if you do, that would be awesome. But if you're normal, like us, like me, like most of us, it'll feel like a big loss. I felt so disappointed. I was like, oh my God, I could have had Kabbalah lessons, but I didn't remember his numbers, so I don't get them. But even still, his messages changed my life. I started to think more deeply about the name Sarah and what it means for Sarah to be more spiritual than Abraham. And my theory is this was like a message from the universe saying the world would be a more spiritual place if we had an established matriarchy instead of a patriarchy. Or if there was a partnership where both genders were considered equal. If the more spiritual of the two gets kind of sidelined and disregarded in the Jewish faith and in the Christian faith, we hear about Father Abraham. How often do we hear about Mother Sarah? Not as often. And it got me to thinking about what made her more spiritual and what should be done about it. And sometimes I think just being told something that gets us thinking in a new direction, it might not change our lives. I didn't start earning more money after getting his message. My relationship didn't improve. It's not like anything came of it physically, but it shifted my perspective. And I never again felt like my birth time or my birth location were an accident. It's like I deliberately chose Jupiter and Sagittarius as an alignment when I came into this world. So yeah, that was the first of my mystical messenger experiences. The second happened when I was working at a store called DKNY, Donna Karan, New York. I was a floor manager in the Vancouver location, and standing behind the counter with a coworker called Nushin, an Indian man walked into the shop. And he was very well dressed, just like the guy at Turnabout had been. Around the same age, he was probably in his mid-50s. At the time, I was 22, so that seemed archaically old. But yeah, he walked up to the counter, and I asked if I could give him a hand with anything. And he said, "I'm not here for the clothing, I'm here for you." And I just looked at him and said, "Okay, what is your spiritual message for me?" And he got super excited. He ran behind the counter. He tried to hug me, but I pushed him away and took a step back kind of defensively and said, "Whoa, like, don't act too familiar. I don't know who you are." And he's like, "When you knew I had a spiritual message for you, I thought you remembered me." And I was like, "No, I don't remember you, but I knew you have a spiritual message for me." And he was like, "How did you know?" And I was like, "You used the same line as the last guy." And he laughed and laughed. And I told him, "Yeah, I was working at another store and a man walked in and said, 'I'm not here for the clothing, I'm here for you.' And he gave me a spiritual message. So I assumed that's what you have also." And these were, by the way, this was like years and years before I had my Babaji experience and had become such a messenger for somebody else. So it was still very, very mind-blowing for me. I thought of these men as being almost like angelic figures, like manifestations of the universe, sent specifically to guide me. Whereas now looking back, I figure they were probably just very intuitively open and they trusted their inner messages, like my friend did with her yoga teacher, like I did with the face shifting girl who came into dragon space. But anyway, he and I started talking, and one of my coworkers, a lady named Mahnaz from Iran, she came up to me and whispered very loudly, "Sarah, I don't trust Indian men. Let's get rid of this guy." And I think coming from Iran, she might not have known that in Canada, you don't loudly say racist things in front of members of the race you're insulting. So I kind of scolded her and I was like, "Mahnaz, you don't say that you don't trust Indian men in front of an Indian man. Like, they're not all the same. I don't know what you experienced, but you can't be saying that." Well, this man defended her and he said she doesn't trust Indian men because she's been hurt. And then he looked back at her and he said something. I'll probably never know what he said unless it comes to me in a dream or a channeling session, but maybe it's not meant for me to know. But he looked at her and said something in Farsi, her mother language. And she replied back to him in Farsi, and the next thing I knew, she was crying on his shoulder and he was stroking her hair, comforting her. And I stepped away to give them some space. And when I felt their hug kind of break, I walked back over to where they were. And Mahnaz looked at me and she said, "Sarah, I was wrong. You can trust this man. He is a saint." And so I looked at him. Mahnaz walked away. And I looked at this man and I said, like, "What did you say to her?" And he said, "That is between Mahnaz and me. So let's talk about your spiritual lessons." And he started telling me that what he had to share was more than just a singular message, that he had to teach me all kinds of things about spirituality. And I started to get my guard up because I thought, like, who is this man to walk into DKNY and declare himself my guru? So I asked him flat out, "Are you saying that you're my guru?" And he said, "No, not at all. I'm here to prepare you for your guru." And that was quite fascinating because, of course, being on my spiritual path, like I'd started following spirituality more seriously since encountering the man at Turnabout. This was around a year later. But of course I came across the concept of a guru, and I liked the idea of having a guide to lead you on your journey and help you figure out what it is you're supposed to figure out. And as we were talking about what that means to prepare me for my guru, my boss Lance came down the stairs. And he was the son of the owner of the store. She was like a Hong Kong businesswoman. And she was kind of preparing him to take over the family business. So he had been watching on the monitors upstairs, like what the surveillance cameras had recorded of this little encounter. So he saw me chatting with this man. He saw that man chatting with Mahnaz and hugging her and then talking some more. So he came down onto the sales floor and said, "Sarah, I have to talk to you." And he pulled me aside and he said, "Is this man a customer or a friend of yours? Because I've been watching and it looks like you're just chit-chatting." And of course the man overheard that and he said, "It's okay, I'm a customer, I'll buy something, like get me that perfume, I'll buy a bottle of that perfume." And Lance said something like, I just want to make sure my sales staff aren't being distracted, whatever. And the man looked at Lance and started speaking in Chinese. And the two of them started chatting. I forget whether it was Mandarin, I think Cantonese, whatever they speak in Hong Kong. But yeah, they started chatting. And at the end of their little conversation, this man patted Lance on the back. Lance patted him on the shoulder. You know the bro hug thing where you pat each other's shoulders. And then Lance turned to me and said, "You've got your key today, so you can lock up the store when it's closing time. I'm heading out. I'm not coming back. Enjoy the rest of your shift. Sorry to have hovered so much. It's a nice day out there. I'm going to go enjoy the sunshine." And he walked out the front door. This had never happened before. This was like unprecedented. Typically, on days that he worked, Lance would spend the entire day, check our bags at closing to make sure that none of the sales girls were stealing anything, because that was the store policy. This time, he just like walked right out in the middle of the day. Didn't even go upstairs to get his stuff. It was very strange. So I looked at this well-dressed Indian man and I said, like, "What did you just say to Lance?" And verbatim what he had said about Menez, he said, "That is between Lance and me." And so I asked him, like, obviously it sounds like English is your first language, but you speak fluent Farsi and fluent Cantonese. Which other languages can you speak? And he said, "Whichever language I need to speak in the moment." And so I switched into French mode and said, "Vraiment?" And he said, "Bien sûr." And I said, "Même le français?" And he said, "Oui, même le français. N'importe quelle langue je dois parler, je peux parler." Which means, like, yes, even French, whichever language I need to speak, I can speak. And I wished I had known more languages to test him. But that alone was miraculous enough for me. I figured, you know what? Okay, he clearly has something he can teach. So I agreed to meet him every week at a cafe called Death by Chocolate. He said that it was important that he pass on certain mystical information to me. And the first time I went to meet him, it seemed a little bit ordinary, like a little bit more worldly than you'd expect a spiritual teacher to be, because he was already there waiting for me when I arrived with a stack of books on the table. There was a book about Vedic astrology. There was a book of Upanishad aphorisms. There were books about yoga. Mainly it was Vedic texts. So things from ancient India. And it's interesting because in that meeting, I found out his name is Javed, which is an Arabic name. And yet everything that he had to share with me on the level of spirituality was what we would call Hindu, falls under the umbrella of Hinduism. Yoga, meditation, Upanishads, Vedas. So I challenged him and said, like, if you really know spirituality so well that you're here to be my teacher, why do you need to read it in books? Why don't you just remember the information and paraphrase it? And he told me he can, but that he brought the books so that I could see for myself that these are ancient truths and not just things he's making up, basically to verify his information and to reveal his sources. Kind of like having a stack of books, like a walking bibliography. And so he started teaching from memory and then saying, "But just so you can see, this is the scripture I get this from." And there was a lot to it. The main things I remember that he taught me in these Death by Chocolate lessons, the first thing is he said, meditate every day at 4 a.m. And he said it doesn't matter whether you go to bed really, really early and wake up at 4 a.m. to meditate, or stay up all night, meditate at 4 and then go to sleep, or go to bed, wake up at 4, meditate, and then go back to bed again. But he said there is power in the chronological time of 4 a.m. and that there are mystics all over the world in all different time zones who meditate at 4 deliberately to tune into each other's wavelengths and to communicate telepathically and to essentially resonate with the frequency of meditative consciousness. So yeah, meditate at 4 a.m. That was one of his teachings. And the rest have really escaped me. I guess it was nothing that I was supposed to hold on to or remember. There were things about the benefits of sitting in Padmasana, which is the lotus posture. There was a lot about the ancient history of the world that was kind of in one ear, out the other. And probably because I've found other places that share it in a way that resonates more with me than these books that he was reading from. But our connection came to a very abrupt ending. So the last meeting that we had, it was maybe the 4th or the 5th time we met at Death by Chocolate. Javed told me that there was a portal in the mountains near Vancouver that linked to the Himalayas, and that if I went with him to that particular spot in the mountains, we could go through that portal and I could meet my family from my previous lifetime. My spiritual family is how he worded it. And I was equally excited and also quite put off by the idea of going into the mountains alone with a man who I really didn't know anything about except his first name and his fascination with spirituality. So I told him that I was a little bit scared to go into the mountains alone with him. And he told me it doesn't have to be alone. He said, bring Mahnaz, bring Lance, bring your coworkers, bring your boyfriend, bring anybody who wants to come. And nobody was able to. Mahnaz had plans. I didn't even invite Lance because I didn't have that kind of connection with him. He was a boss. I was an employee. It wasn't one of those blurred line friendship workplaces. And when I told my then boyfriend about it, he got very jealous and very angry, which I didn't expect because he had female friends. He would sometimes go partying Friday night and I wouldn't see him again until Monday morning. He was definitely not the jealous type. And yet when I told him about Javed and these spiritual meetings we'd had at this chocolate shop, he got extremely possessive. And he essentially forbade me from going to see him again. And so I called my mom, which is something I did at least once a week back in my Vancouver years. I would call her, fill her in about my life, hear the news from home. And when I told her, like, can you believe he's being so possessive and told me not to go meet this man ever again, my mom totally echoed his sentiment. And she said something that essentially stopped me from ever going to see that teacher again. And that was, she said, I don't usually pull the mom card on you, but I'm going to do it now. Like, as your mother, I'm begging you, please don't ever go see that man again. It scares me that he targeted you and you've been meeting with him, and I don't want you going into the mountains alone or with other people. Just promise me that you'll stand him up. So the next week, when we were supposed to meet at Death by Chocolate to make our plans to go to this portal, I stood him up. I didn't go. I didn't have a phone number to call him to cancel. And I was still so young. I think if something like this were to happen today, I would call every friend who I have in the local area and say, like, bitch, you are coming with me. We are going to find out what's in that portal. But at the time, I just respected my mom's wishes too much. And I started running, scenarios in my head. Like, what if we really do go through a portal, find ourselves in the Himalayas, and I stay and don't come back, like what that will look like to her is a missing person case, and she'll blame herself for not being more strict with her verbal interventions. So yeah, I didn't go. And every Wednesday when it came time to close up the store, I had a really strong pang of regret. Like I really felt like the first messenger who met me at Turnabout got me onto my spiritual path. I started researching more about astrology, sitting more often with my crystals, going outside at night to stargaze, like really contemplating the universe. And when the second arrived at DKNY, it's like he gave me actionable things to do to be on that spiritual path, like meditate at this time every day, sit in this particular posture, eat these specific combinations of herbs with your dinner. Like it was all very practical stuff to do. And when I stood him up, I kind of felt like I missed the most important part of our connection, which is to go through that portal. Now, in those days, I didn't even yet know who Baba Ji was. It's only now, as I talk this all out in a video, that I hadn't even considered that Mahavatar Babaji lives in the Himalayas. He's said to be a deathless mystic who has occupied that space with a handful of disciples for like 2,000 years. Back then, I didn't know that. I hadn't really read any books like autobiography of a yogi. Like the only Vedic wisdom I had access to came from Javed. So yeah, Wednesdays felt very sad after that when I would close the store. It's like this world of mystical spirituality that had opened to me, I have closed the door on it. Like I regretted that. So my sales started to really drop. I lost my motivation. I actually hated working at that store. Like as a strict vegan, I hated the fact that I had to sell leather goods and wool things. So it's like my sales were dropping because I hated to sell also. But on top of that, I was feeling very regretful for having stood up Javed. And my boss transferred me to another store. The same family who owned the DKNY franchise also owned a luxury store called Enda B that was in a whole other part of Vancouver, like a half hour away by bus. And on my very last shift at DKNY, I was putting things away from the fitting rooms when a thought of Javed popped into my head, and I teared up, and I thought, like, I will truly never see him again because he knew I work at DKNY, but he doesn't know that I'm going to be working at Enda B, and he doesn't have my phone number. Like, he'll never be able to find me, and I'll never find out what it was that his lessons were leading to. And as I was, folding clothes and hanging up hangers and just thinking about Javed, it was about 5 minutes before my shift ended when I heard the bell, the bell that rings when a customer opens the front door of the store. And I just knew it was him. Even before I looked, I felt that it was him. I think a lot of us have this kind of auric field intuition. It's not something I hear talked about often, but it's like if your back is turned, when specific people walk into the room, you can tell, like, who just entered the room. Some people might kind of blend in with the woodwork or not really register, but I think people who have a purpose in your life, when you feel their aura start mingling with your aura, like when they come into proximity of your space, you know it. So yeah, I knew it was Javed coming in. And I turned around really slowly and really deliberately, kind of bracing myself for either profound excitement or profound disappointment. Like, if I was right, if that's him, then oh my God, I do get to see him one last time. And if it's not him, then like, fuck, I really got my hopes up. It really felt like it was going to be him. So yeah, I turned around and sure enough, it was him. And it's like he was gliding, not walking. It's like he was gliding into the store. And I just dropped what I was doing and ran into his arms. I didn't even think twice about it. We had never hugged before that moment. I'd always been very physically guarded of my space. But yeah, I just ran into his arms and cried. I felt like Manaz on that first day, the day he spoke to her in Farsi and she cried on his shoulder, and now I was crying. And he laughed. He laughed so hard and said, "Why are you crying?" And I told him, "I'm just so sorry that I stood you up. I felt guilty. I thought I would never see you again." And he said, nobody, he said, how did he word it? Sorry, I'm trying to get it verbatim. It's been so long since I've even told this story to anybody. I don't want to miss a word. So yeah, he was comforting me. I told him I felt guilty, and I said I thought I would never see him again. And he said, "You thought I would not know how to find you if you're not here, but you forget. You never told me you were here in the first place. And nobody told the previous messenger that you were at the other store. Wherever you go for the rest of your life, we will always know how to find you when we need to." And it was just so affirming for me. It made me feel so seen and so recognized, and also like, I don't need to do anything or worry. I don't need to stay in touch with these messengers to make sure that they know how to reach me or where to find me. It was like, oh, right. Like, if he found me here, they can find me anywhere. So I apologized for standing him up, and I started to explain that my ex, who was then my boyfriend, had like forbidden me from seeing him, and that my mom had gotten scared and begged me not to see him again. And he told me that I had nothing to be sorry for and that it was the right decision to make. And I asked him, how was it the right decision when the decision I made meant that I didn't get to see that portal and that I had to stand you up? And he said, it was the right decision because it's the one you made. And every single thing you do for the rest of your life will always be the right thing to do. And at that point, he kind of pushed me back by the shoulders and looked into my eyes. And while looking into my eyes, he repeated that and said, "Do you understand what I'm saying? Everything you do in your entire life is the right thing to do because you do it." And it was almost like I had enlightenment in that moment, because for the first time, I really understood the meaning of free will, that we have infinite options in any given moment. Like right now, right here, you could turn off this video, walk out your door, and go for a jog. Or you could turn off this video, walk into your kitchen, and gorge yourself on a snack. Or you could watch this video to the very end and then just sit and stare at whatever the algorithm pops up next. Or you could pause it and leave a comment. Like, just within the framework of what you do to interact with the end of this video, there are infinite options available. And sometimes we get really hard on ourselves if we think back to what feel like missed opportunities or mistakes that we made, like things we wish we had done differently or not done at all. But when we consider the fact that this reality is not all there is to reality, this is a very limited version of reality. What we see, what we hear, what we feel, those with whom we interact. Like in the infinity of time and space, when infinite places exist and infinite moments in time exist, and also infinite possibilities for every place and every time also exist, there will never be just one right thing to do or wrong thing to do. There's only options. What do you choose? And when you decide within yourself that you are surrendered to the highest good, that you want to make sure to do the right thing, and you're willing to make a mistake, you're willing to do the wrong thing in an effort to become the right version of yourself, everything that you do that leads to the outcome you want can be seen as a good move, a good decision, the right thing to do. But everything you do or don't do that leads to an outcome you don't want, instead of thinking of those things as mistakes or fuck ups or missed opportunities or deviations from the path that you're supposed to be on, if instead we take those as lessons and we genuinely integrate them and we genuinely learn from them and we choose not to make that same decision again if we face a similar circumstance, or we choose to alter course and do something differently to correct the outcome that we don't prefer to get the outcome that we do prefer, then there was never a mistake in the first place. There was just a solidification of our will to get to the result that we want or to do the thing that we prefer to do. Like, okay, if I missed that opportunity, I will never miss an opportunity again. And now you're going to be like hyper vigilant, looking out for the opportunities. It's like, of all the mystical messages from all the mystical messengers I've met in my life, could be like put up on a screen in front of me, if I were to pick the one that I mentally revisit the most, that has brought me the greatest peace and the biggest benefit, it would be that one from Javed. He was completely unhurt by the fact that I stood him up. He had no ego in it whatsoever. I asked him what would have happened if I had gone through that portal. And he said, it's irrelevant because you didn't. But don't worry, you didn't miss anything. Whatever you were meant to experience, you will experience. It's really interesting. I wonder if you've had anything like that, any similar messages, because it brought me so much clarity to just keep going and not dwell and not worry and to trust myself. And thanks to Javed, throughout my life, every time I have made a mistake and realized an outcome that I didn't want, or found myself trapped, or found myself in a situation I didn't prefer, I've always been able to go back and say to myself, what I did was the right thing to do because it's what I did. And do I want to keep going on this trajectory, or do I want to shift gears now? That's kind of why I'm back to talking about spirituality and sharing my art on YouTube again. I had shifted into more of a crafting life, making junk journals and sharing those on another channel. And I started to really miss the spiritual discussion, the mystical discourse. And I started to really miss the flow state I get into when I make art, and the joy that I feel when I finish a painting and it looks nothing like what I might have thought it would look like at the beginning, and it looks really cool. Which is how this one turned out, by the way. I love this painting. I'm going to do a short video, like a YouTube short, explaining why I call it Drops from the Cosmic Ocean and what that means to me symbolically. But I was going to get into that in this one. I just don't think there's time. I've already spoken enough, I think, for one video. Although I did meet other mystical messengers that I would like to tell you about maybe in future videos. But for now, I think that's where I'd like to leave this. And I would like to know from you, like I said at the beginning, have you ever had someone without knowing anything about you, without having Googled you or snooped on your social media, they just know exactly the right thing to tell you, exactly when you need to hear it? Or have you been that messenger for somebody else? And how did you get the impulse? How did you know what to say to them? And how did they validate your intuition? What did they tell you your words meant to them? I'm very, very curious. If it's never happened to you or through you, like if you've never been the recipient or the messenger, but you want to experience something like that, put it out there. And by out there, I don't mean put it on your like Twitter or X or whatever it's called now. I don't mean like tweet it and tell people, because then somebody might see that and go fake it. But put it out there in your space. Start thinking about the universe and about life and about intuition and connection and messengers and spiritual teachers. And let the universe know that if somebody comes up to you and says, "Hey, I have a spiritual message for you," instead of saying like, "Fuck off, I'm not interested," that you'll stop and give them the time to listen and contemplate what they say, and it'll happen. I'm absolutely sure that it will, because you are the manifester of your mind. We might not be able to change the infrastructure of this world, because the infrastructure of this world, like who is politically in power, which corporations are the financial rulers, which media gets pushed the most by the algorithm and why, and which addiction spirals we're falling into, which like addictive elements are being added to our foods that are hooking us, and which neurotoxins are being pumped into our drinking water. We might not be able to control the physical world that we're in, but we are able to shape the experience of it that we have. And if we want to manifest more mystical encounters or more conversations of this nature, more creativity, more inspiration, we absolutely can. And it doesn't start externally, it starts internally by having the openness and the will to be available for such things. So yeah, on that note, I will say thank you so much for watching this video. Please do let me know in the comments any thoughts it may have sparked for you. And if you have any suggestions for future topics, I am very open to input. So much love to you. Thank you again for watching. Please do like, subscribe, comment, hype it if that's still a thing. That all helps a small channel like mine get more noticed by the algorithm. And yeah, when you help somebody else reach their goals, the universe knows to send others to help you reach yours also. Maybe I'll make that another topic for a future video. But in the meantime, yeah, so much love to you. Love to your furry friends. If you have any pets, give them a big hug for me. And we'll see you next time. Bye for now.